Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. This is Katie Watts. You are on the Year 1 State Error Rate Training webinar. We will get started in just a moment, but since we did have some technical difficulties at our last webinar, I just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. If you can hear me, please raise your hand. I see some hands raised, so I'll take that as a good sign. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the slides, but we're going to hold off for just a moment to let some more folks join us. I still see people signing on, so we'll give everyone a moment. Thank you. All right, so it is now 2:01 Eastern Time. We'll go ahead and get started. This is the Year 1 State Error Rate Training on using the Record Review Worksheet to conduct case reviews. Welcome, welcome. Some introductions. This again is Katie Watts. I am the Error Rate Lead with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. With me today is Janae Broadway. She is an Error Rate and Program Integrity Specialist, also at the Subsidy Center. And from the Office of Child Care Central Office, we have Shelley Dilks and Linda Winings. As always, I want to take a moment to go through some logistics. If you were registered for the webinar as of this morning, you should have received an email from me with the slides as well as a blank record review worksheet. If you did not get that, it should be available in the GoToWebinar dashboard in the handout section. The webinar will be recorded, so if you would like to get a copy of the recording, if you'd like to hear it again, or maybe a colleague was not able to join us, please feel free to send me an email. My address is right here, kwatts@wrma.com. If you do have any questions or problems, technical issues during the webinar, please send Janae an email, jbroadway@wrma.com. She'll be monitoring her email to help with those technical issues. So before we move into the content of today's training, I just wanted to take a moment to discuss kind of the purpose of today's call. This is going to be a little bit different from other webinars that you've been on with us. The purpose is really to just walk through some example case record reviews and talk about how to complete the record review worksheet correctly. So because of this, you know, the target audience for the webinar is really those Year 1 states that have either gotten started with reviews or are planning to get started soon. That being said, if you're planning to do retrospective reviews, if you're not really getting started quite yet, that's fine. You're, definitely more than welcome to stay on, and I hope that you're able to, pick up some useful information from this as well. We will not be discussing things like customization of the record review worksheet. We covered that in, our previous webinars, and, we can certainly provide one-on-one TA on that. This is really just about conducting those case record reviews once you've had the worksheet approved and are ready to start conducting. So I think that, there's probably some people on this call that have not used the record review worksheet before. Maybe you are new to this. So I did want to take a moment to give kind of a really brief overview of what we're talking about here with the record review worksheet. What do we mean with, all of the different terminology? So the record review worksheet, or RRW, or ACF 403, that's the official title, is a standardized form to assess child care case record reviews for the Federal Child Care Improper Payment Review. And the purpose, the goal, is to determine whether child care eligibility was correctly determined and whether the correct subsidy, authorization, and payment was made. So that's what we use the worksheet for. And as I mentioned, the record review worksheet is customized by states. All states have different child care policies, procedures. So we, ask states to customize portions of the record review worksheet to conform to the specifics of their program. So you'll hear me talking about elements, columns, all of that. The record review worksheet consists of 5 sections. So really quickly, 5 sections. Here's an example. Section 1 is program forms. And section 2 is priority group placement, sorry. And those 5 sections are further divided into 11 elements. So that's really these rows here. This is element 100 and element 200, and so on. Elements 100 through 410 each have 4 columns. So you can see here, for each element, 4 columns. The first one is elements of eligibility and payment determination, and then so on. Oops. Element 500, which is our last element, only has 2 columns. So we will show some examples of that in a few minutes. The record review worksheet also consists of a missing or insufficient documentation, or MID table. And for each case record review, the reviewers complete the case information at the top of the worksheet. So that is this information: child ID, state, county, and so on. Complete columns 2, 3, and 4 of elements 100 through 410, and complete both of the columns in element 500. And complete the mid table if applicable. The mid table is the missing and insufficient documentation table, and we will show some examples of that. All right, so let's jump into our first case review example. Now, if you received that email from me this morning, I did mention that you might want to follow along on your own worksheet. And this first example we will go through pretty slowly. So if you want to take notes or follow along on your own worksheet, this would be a great example to do that on. So in my presentation, in the slides here, these come from this mock record review worksheet that I wrote up. And again, I sent this to you this morning. This again is a kind of a mock, a fake worksheet that I have added my own customizations to. So we will be using this example in the PowerPoint. You can see that I've customized column 1 with some policy citations. I've customized column 2 with some questions. And just again, keep in mind that your state's record review worksheet will look different from this. You've customized it to your own program's requirements. Again, this is just an example. So jumping right in to element 100, application redetermination forms. This is the element where we look to see if the application is there and complete and any other required forms are present. Again, reviewers do not do anything in column 1 other than read the boilerplate and make sure that they understand what to look for. Moving into column 2, we ask that reviewers complete everything that's applicable here. We don't like to see anything left blank unless it's genuinely cannot be answered. So in our example, the application was complete. The child care agreement form was complete. The proof of assets was there. However, this final item, we have an error. The application was not processed in a timely manner. So let's move over to the comment section. We use the comment section here for a number of things. It can be used to show your work, show math, explain what the nature of the error was, or just describe what documentation was reviewed. We ask that reviewers kind of make good use of this comment section. And here you can see that I've described what the error was. The application was not processed. It was dated 10/1, was not processed until 10/30. And I also mentioned that, the application and agreement were included in the case file. Column 3, the findings column, is really to describe, whether or not there was an error. Was it a mid-error? Missing or insufficient documentation? Was it a payment or administrative error? Descriptions of, the descriptions of what was found in the case file, that sort of thing. It can go in column 3, but we really like to see it described in column 2. We don't like to see that kind of information being brought in new in column 3. So as you can see, I've said that there was an administrative error because the application was not processed within 15 business days. So in terms of the, what the nature of the error was, I didn't really describe anything new here. I just said the application was not processed. And I do say that there was an administrative error. So really from this information in column 3, we can go ahead and code column 4. Yes, there was an error, so we're going to code 1. And know that error was not caused by missing or insufficient documentation. It was, because of not being processed timely. Item 2A, if you've been through this before and a few years ago, this will be new to you. 2A asks if there was a mid error, was it a potential improper payment error? So 2A is only completed if item 2 was coded as Y. Otherwise, you can just leave that one blank. So we'll leave that one blank. All right, let's move on to element 200. I made this one pretty simple. I said that, the state served all eligible children during the sample month. And I think that, in quite a few of the states that are on this call, this will be the case for you as well. However, even if, this element is not necessarily applicable, we still ask that you complete columns 3 and 4. You can just mention no error. And column 4 is coded as 0 for no error and NA. If there was no error, item 2 will always be coded as NA. And again, 2A can be left blank. Element 300, qualifying head of household. So I have a couple of questions here. The first one is whether the client meets the definition of parent head of household. And yes, in our example, there was no error here. What definition does the client meet? Parent. So I use the comments box here to describe both what documentation was reviewed, and that was the birth certificate. And then I also provide just a little bit of extra information that it's a single parent household with 2 children. So again, you don't necessarily need to include, this exact type of comment here. But again, this particular reviewer thinks it's useful to include this in the comment section. Especially describing the documentation that was reviewed, I think is really helpful to include in the comments. And then again, column 3, we just state that there's no error. And column 4, we code 0 and NA. Okay, element 310 in our example, residency. We just have one question here. The client is a resident of example state. Yes. Again, in the comments, we're going to use that to describe the documentation that was reviewed. Columns 3 and 4 filled out the same as in the previous element, no error, and coded as 0 and NA in column 4. Element 320 is on parental work training status. Does the parent meet a need for service? We're going to fill that out as yes. Need for service is employment. If it's a 2-parent family, does the second parent meet the need for service? And we're going to code that as NA, or fill in NA because it's a single parent. We do see sometimes that in the customized worksheets, there's no items here on whether it's a 2-parent family. So that would be, again, something that you would want to include in your comment section, if applicable. In the comment section here, I've noted that the client is employed and works 35 hours a week. Again, you don't necessarily need to give the number of hours here. That was a question that came up when we did this training with a different cohort of states, but it might be useful to note. So there's no error, and NA for item 2 in column 4. And again, skip 2A. In qualifying child, we look at the age of the child and the citizenship or qualified alien status. So we note the child is 3 years old. This next item about age 13 to 18, we code NA because it's not applicable here. And there was documentation of citizenship. So again, we'll use the comments just to describe what the documentation was reviewed. The child birth certificate was in the case file. And again, there's no error, so we will code column 4 as such. All right, so moving on to element 340. In this element, we look at the type of care that was authorized, whether it was the correct type of care, and whether the correct provider payment rate was authorized. So just a little note here, if you were involved with this a few years back, if you've been involved with these reviews before, the provider payment rate used to be included in element 400. We've moved it to 340. We thought it made more sense here. So that's just something to keep in mind. So here we've noted that full-time care was authorized. Yes, it was the correct type of care. But no, it was not the correct provider payment rate. So we have an error here. And in this comment section, we describe the nature of the error. The part-time rate of $60 was assigned due to system error. It should have been a full-time rate. So those errors about provider payment rate, if you do happen to come across them, again, they will show up in element 340 and not 400 this time. Okay, so I've noted in the findings column that there was an error due to the wrong payment rate assigned. And the coding in column 4, we have 1 because there was an error, and N because that error was not caused by missing or insufficient documentation. Okay. In element 350, we look at what type of provider was used and whether the provider met all of the applicable requirements. So this was a family child care provider, and yes, the provider met all of the requirements. So we've used the comment section here just to kind of expand on that, that the provider did meet the policy requirements as determined by the licensing department. So there's no error in NA for item 2. All right, moving on to 400. So again, in the past in this element, we looked at, both income, the provider rate, copay, as well as calculating the subsidy amount. This time around, we're just looking at income and copay. So all required documentation was present in the case file. Total family income was $2,660. Family size was 3. Yes, the family met income thresholds. We've noted that the copay was $40 and it was the correct copay. So in the comments here, I just mentioned what was reviewed, and I mentioned that, there was the reviewer's calculation matches that of the eligibility worker. A lot of times we do see some math in this comment section for 400, adding up different sources of income or different, weeks of income to determine what that monthly amount was. Also figuring out, whether the correct copay was assigned. So you might find that helpful here. No error, and so I code column 4 as such. All right, so element 410 is where we look at the whether the authorization was correct, and if not, was there a improper payment made? In the past, element 410 also included the case summary. This is no longer the case. We just look at the payment and authorization here. So here we've determined that the eligibility worker subsidy amount was $92 and the reviewer subsidy amount was $345. So there is a discrepancy here of $253. So because of that, we're going to bring in the sample month payment amount, and that was $92. All right, so I have a whole bunch of things here in the comment section. I'm not going to go through it, every single thing here, but the gist of it is that I've included the calculation for kind of extrapolating the weekly rate to the monthly rate, extrapolating the weekly copay to the monthly copay, and then determining what that difference between the eligibility worker's subsidy amount and the reviewer's subsidy amount is. And in the findings column, column 3, I note that there was an underpayment of $253 found here. There was an error, and it was not caused by missing documentation. It was due to the payment rate, wrong payment rate being assigned. So on our next slide, I'm showing the MID table, the missing and insufficient documentation table. This particular example did not have any MID potential improper payment errors, so we're not going to actually be using the MID table. I'm just showing it here because it's part of the template, so just to be to be complete. I think in our next example, we will be using the MID table. All right, finally, element 500, case summary. So this is where we summarize all of the errors that were found in the case. So I've noted that there was an administrative error in element 100 due to the application not being processed in time. And we also found an underpayment of $253 due to the wrong provider payment rate being applied. And that's elements 340 and 410 are cited here. So element 500, column 2 is where we code results for the entire worksheet. And if there's a case where there is a improper payment error as well as an administrative error, we always make sure to code for the improper payment error. So it's not the case here in this example, but sometimes you might find that, there was a improper payment that was not due to MID, and there was also an administrative error that was due to MID. And in that case, you would make sure to code item 2 for that payment error. Here, the payment error was not caused by missing or insufficient documentation. Items 2A through 2E really concern the MID, potential improper payments, and the additional inquiry. So we did not have any of those types of errors. We did not fill out the MID table. So we'll just make zeros down the line here. I think in our next example, we will be filling those out with real numbers. We had an underpayment, so we code 3 as U. The improper payment amount was $253, and the total payment amount for the sample month was $92. All right, so we've made it through our first example. I do not see any questions that have come in or hands raised, but I'll just take a couple seconds to see if anything does come in. If you have any questions about this example. Okay, hearing nothing, we will move on to our example 2. So in this one, we'll go through it a little bit more quickly since some of the elements, the way we've completed them will be the same as in the previous example. All right, actually, I just got a question or comment that came in, so I'm going to go back a few slides. All right, bear with me. Oops. Right, so I'm going back to element 340. And if you recall in this example, it turns out that there was an error due to the wrong payment rate being assigned. In column 3 here, I've noted that there was an error due to the wrong payment rate being assigned. What we actually do like to see here, and I apologize for not making this clear in this example, we do like to see here in column 3 whether or not that error was a payment error, an administrative error, or a potential improper payment error. In this example, we filled out element 340. We know the wrong payment rate was assigned. We know that this, will probably result in an improper payment, but maybe not. There might be something else going on. So in the findings column here, sorry about that. It would be good to note, and I apologize again that I did not do this here, to note that either, there's a potential improper payment or, that this might be a payment error, instead of just saying error. So I hope that's clear. I think if you go back to my example in element 100, I did make it clear that it's just an administrative error. But if there's, the potential for an improper payment, you would want to note that here in column 3. All right, so let's move on to example 2. And again, I'm going to go through this a bit more quickly. In element 100, if you recall in our last example, that one did have an error. And in this example, there was no error. The application was dated 10/1 and it was completed 10/10. And these things were present in the case file. So there's no error here. Element 200 is the same as last time. There's no error. It's not really an issue in the state since we served all eligible children during the sample month. Element 300, again, is the same as last time. There's no error. Birth certificate was present in the case file. Element 310, again, the same as last time. The client is a resident. A copy of the driver's license was in the case file. In element 320, the parent met the need for service due to employment. .330 is the same as last time as well. The child met the eligibility criteria for age and citizenship, so there's no error. All right, I'll stop for a moment on 340, since again, there was an error in the last example in 340. In this example, there was full-time care. The correct type of care was authorized. And in this example, the correct provider payment rate was authorized, so there's no error here. The full-time payment rate of $115 a week was assigned, so that's correct. And we will complete column 3 and column 4 as such. No error. All right, element 350 is the same as last time. There's no error surrounding the provider arrangement. Moving to 400, financial requirements. So in this example, was all required income documentation present in the case file? No. So this example had missing income documentation. And in the findings column, I've noted that there is a missing or insufficient documentation, potential improper payment error due to missing income information. The other items in column 2 at this point could not be completed because we do not have that income information. And column 4 is coded as having an error. It's due to missing or insufficient documentation. And it's potential improper payment error due to missing or insufficient documentation. So at this point, we know we're missing information. It could result in an improper payment. So we're going to bring in the missing or insufficient documentation table now, and I'll show an example of an additional inquiry. And once we've walked through that, we'll come back to element 400 to see if we can go ahead and successfully fill out the rest of it. All right, so again, this is the mid-table. And since our example had the error in element 400, I'm going to kind of pull this row out in the next slide, make it bigger so that everyone's able to see everything okay. So in the mid-table, there are 9 columns. The first column is just the element. Again, that corresponds to the element that had the error, which is 400 here. In column 2, we describe what was missing or insufficient. there was missing income information. In column 3, we enter the dollar amount of the potential improper payment. And if it's going to be a total overpayment, this is going to just match what that payment amount was for the sample month. So we're going to say $345 here. Is there an additional inquiry that can be made to mitigate the potential improper payment error? So I'm not going to go into great detail on what the additional inquiry entails. We did address that at our last webinar, and it is in the DCI as well. But the gist of it is there a way to go beyond the lead agency's normal eligibility procedures or processes to determine whether the client was eligible, whether, that income information can be found from a different source? And in this case, we'll say, yes, there is an additional inquiry that we can do. So because of that, we skip column 5 that says, if no, describe why not. So we'll skip that and move to column 6. And this is where we describe what was done for the additional inquiry. We contacted the SNAP office to locate missing pay stubs. So in this example state, there's no, shared screens or anything with SNAP. It's not, sharing that information is not part of the normal eligibility processes. So we went outside of those processes, contacted SNAP to see if they had that missing income information. And they did. So in column 7, that is coded as 1. And due to the information from that missing, those missing pay stubs, we determined that, the entire improper payment could be mitigated. In the final column, just describe briefly how it was determined that the payment could be mitigated or not. So here we've just said that the SNAP office was able to provide those pay stubs with the missing income information. All right, so now I'm going to move back to the larger mid-table. As you can see in the row for 400, I've included that information from the last slide. Not quite all of the words, just for the, for the sake of space. But I wanted to show you the last row, which is the totals row. And this we just tally up what's in 3, 4, 7, and 8, columns 3, 4, 7, and 8. And in this case, since there was only one row that needed to be completed here, the totals row will just equal the same as what was in the previous row. And this information from the totals row does come back in element 500. So we will show that in a few minutes. All right, so let's go back to element 400, where we left off. We determined that, there was that missing income documentation and it was a potential improper payment error. However, due to the additional inquiry, it turns out we were able to mitigate that error, or we were able to mitigate the improper payment. There's still an error here, but it's not, the potential improper payment was able to be mitigated. So let's go ahead and fill out the rest of this element. We were able to determine, based on those pay stubs that we received from SNAP, that the total family monthly income was $2,660. Family size was 3. Yes, the family met the income threshold. And the correct parent fee was assigned based on that income. So in the comment section, I've detailed that the income information was missing from the case file. Refer to the mid-table for details on the additional inquiry. And also mention that, the gross wages were $2,660 and that the reviewer's calculation matched that of the eligibility worker. In column 3, you see that I've added a note that that potential improper payment error was mitigated by the additional inquiry. So moving on to element 410. The eligibility worker subsidy amount was $345. The reviewer subsidy amount was also $345, again, because that improper payment was able to be mitigated through the additional inquiry. If it had not been mitigated, then that reviewer subsidy amount would have been 0. We can skip the next two items, difference and sample month payment amount, because that's not applicable here. There's no difference. And again, in the comments section, I've just done a little bit of math on figuring out what the monthly rate was and the parent copay. Again, these two items here that I've left blank, difference if applicable and sample month payment amount if applicable, we don't need to bring those in unless there was a discrepancy between the two subsidy amounts here. We do not look at payment amount in this element unless there was a discrepancy between these subsidy amounts. We will bring in the sample month payment in element 500, but we do not need to look at it here in this example. So we have no error. And column 4 is coded as having no error. You will also note that here in element 410, there is no 2A. Since this is not kind of bringing in new errors, this is just figuring out whether there was an improper payment. Right, moving on to the case summary. So in our findings column, I've summarized what was found in this case. There was a potential improper payment error due to that missing income information in 400, but it was mitigated by the additional inquiry, and there were no errors in any other element. So we've coded element 500, column 2, as yes, there was an error because that income information was missing. Even though the payment was able to be mitigated, there's still an administrative error here. It was caused by missing or insufficient documentation. And for 2A, there was one potential improper payment error identified due to MID. And it was $345. Again, that's being brought in from that totals column totals row in the mid table. The additional inquiry was used once, and it was successful. The improper payment was mitigated once. The total amount of improper payments mitigated was $345. And so there is no improper payment. There's no over or underpayment. So we have NA for item 3. Total amount of improper payment is 0. And the total payment amount for the sample month is $345. All right, so again, we'll take a breather for a moment and see if there's any questions or comments on this. Again, I know that some of you on this call have not started with your reviews yet, so this might be, all new territory for you. But, there's no such thing as a stupid question. So if you do have anything, feel free to raise your hand or enter in the questions box. All right, so I do have one more example here. Actually, we had a fourth example too. I don't know if we'll have time for it, but we'll definitely go through this third one. All right, so in this example, starting with element 100, the very first item, is the application complete with signature? And no, it is not. These other things in the case file were there, the agreement form and proof of assets, and the application was processed timely. So in the comments section, I've kind of noted, again, the nature of the error. There were pages missing from the application, including the signature page. So in this example state, those missing pages from the application would result in an improper payment error. And again, I cannot stress this enough. In your state, things might be a little different based on your own policies. Maybe this would only be an administrative error. But in this example, we're going to say it is a payment error or a potential payment error. Going to column 4, there is an error due to missing or insufficient documentation. So since we have a Y coded in number 2, we'll go down to 2A. And yes, this is a potential improper payment. So since we have Y coded, let's take a look at the mid table. And in this, I wanted to show an example of another example of using the mid table for additional inquiry. So this is an element 100. So I've just showed that row here. Again, I'll pull it out in the next slide. Describe the documentation that was missing or insufficient. There was missing pages from the application. The dollar amount of the improper payment, again, $345. And is there an additional inquiry that can be made to mitigate the error? And in this case, there is not. So we'll fill out column 5. Cannot get the missing childcare application from another source. You can't call up SNAP and ask them for a childcare application. It's something that's more internal. So the takeaway here is that, anytime that there's a potential improper payment error that's caused by MID, you will need to fill out this table, whether or not you actually did an additional inquiry. If you did not do an additional inquiry, if you were not able to, you still need to fill out columns 2, 3, and 4. Columns 6 through 9, again, are only completed if there was an additional inquiry. So moving back to the mid table, again, we're going to look at the totals row at the very bottom. And since, we haven't gone through the other elements yet, but we're going to say that there were no other mid potential improper payment errors in this case. So just to make it simple, we're going to total it now at the bottom, that there was $345 in potential improper payments and 0 additional inquiries that could be made. Okay, so that was element 100. Moving on to 200, again, this is going to be the same as last time. There's no error. 300, there was no error here either. The birth certificate was reviewed. Let's take a look at 310. Here the question is whether the client was a resident of the state, and I've checked yes. However, if you take a look at the comments here, I've noted that the residency information was missing from the case file, but it was available in the system. So this is a good example of, how the comments boxes can be used to provide some additional information. If you were to just check off that yes checkbox, you would not know that there was some missing information here. So the comments boxes can be used to expand upon that, to describe exactly what was going on. So in this state, that residency information that was missing, it would just be an administrative error since it was available in the system. And again, things might be different in your state based on your policies. In some states, the residency information missing from the case file would result in an improper payment, or it might not be an error at all. In our example, we'll say that it was an administrative error. So this was an error. It was due to missing or insufficient documentation, but we've coded 2A as N because it is not a potential improper payment error. It's just an administrative error, so there's no need to go to the mid-table here. So just backing up for a second here, this again is a good example of using the comments box. If we were just to look at, columns 3 and 4, and if the comment section was blank, it wouldn't quite make sense. We'd say, well, everything looks okay in column 2. The yes box is checked. So that comments box is being used to describe what the nature of the error was. So we're not bringing in all new information in column 3. All right, moving on actually, let me go back one more time to 310, sorry. So in this example, I wanted to also mention that the residency information missing from the case file, but it was available in the system. So this is another area where, we might see differences from state to state. In this example, just, to make it clear that this residency information that's available in the system is something that the eligibility worker, as well as the reviewer, would have access to, would be checking. So if the system is not something that is normally, available to the eligibility workers, then, looking into additional systems or accessing those would be considered an additional inquiry. Again, it's considering what is normally available or typically available to the eligibility workers and reviewers versus what would be going outside of that. So that would be the difference between, what kind of error would need to be looked at further for an additional inquiry versus, what would not. So I hope that is clear. If not, feel free to reach out. All right, moving on to 320. It's again the same as in the last example, so not going to spend a ton of time on it. Same with 330. In 340, there was also no error. And in 350, also no error. Before I move on to 400, I wanted to address a question that came in, a really good question from Paula in Colorado. If an error is identified due to missing or insufficient documentation and the information was available from an interface from another eligibility system, would we have to gather the actual documents or could we use the information received from the interface? Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand this, Paula. Would this be, are you thinking about like the additional inquiry or just kind of normal access to interfaces? Let me take you off mute for a moment. Oh, additional inquiry. Okay, thank you, Paula. So I think that, if the information was available in that interface, then that would be acceptable. I don't think that you need like the hard copies of the documents. The goal here is to determine if the client was eligible and, if through that system interface, you're able to determine that that information is present and that it all makes sense, then yeah, I think that system information would suffice there. You would not need that hard copy. Does that answer your question? Okay, would that apply to missing or insufficient documentation info also if available to the child care worker? So in that case, so the question is, if it's something that is part of the normal processes, if it would normally typically be available to the child care worker, would that also apply? And the answer to that, Paula, is I can't tell you. That would be something where it would depend on your state error definition. So going back a couple, well, I'm not going to actually go back to the slide, but in the example where there was the missing residency information, but it was available in the system, in our example state, that would just be an administrative error. But in some states, their error definition would say that either that's not an error at all, or it's a payment error, or something in between. So thank you, Paul. That's a great question. All right, so moving on to 410. Here, the eligibility workers subsidy amount was $345. And the reviewer subsidy amount was $0. If you recall, there was that missing application, and there was no additional inquiry that was able to be done here. So in this state, that would be considered to be an ineligible case. So we'll go ahead and complete the next two items: difference of $345, and the sample month payment amount was $345. I don't have anything in the comments here. Again, sometimes we see in 340 or in element 410, do the math. So we might, use the comment section here to figure out what the subsidy amount was, what it should have been. I noted in column 3 that there was an overpayment of $345 due to the fact that the entire case was considered ineligible. There was an error, and it was due to missing documentation. Oh, I did have comments here. Sorry, just had my animation in the wrong order. So yeah, I've noted that there was an improper payment error due to that missing application. All right, so moving on to the case summary, element 500. Noting that there was a complete overpayment of $345 due to the application, incomplete application. I've cited elements 100 and 410. And there was also that administrative error due to the missing residency information. And I've cited element 310 for that. So moving on to column 2, yes, there was an error. Yes, it was caused by missing or insufficient documentation. That payment error that we're looking at here was due to missing documentation. There was one potential improper payment error with $345, but no additional inquiry was used here. So we have 0 for 2C and 2D. And for 2E, $0 for the total amount of improper payments that were mitigated. So there was an overpayment of $345. The sample month payment amount was $345. Okay, so we're not going to have time to go through the last example. But, as you get started with your case reviews, we'd love to have to walk through some cases with you. Happy to show you some more examples. I hope that, this was helpful, that you learned something from it. That's our goal for these webinars. On this last slide, I have contact information for your region's error rate specialists. So if you do have any questions or concerns, have some TA, follow-up requests, please reach out to your error rate specialist, Leanne Bryan. She's in Region 1, as well as for our friends in Puerto Rico. Janae Broadway is in Region 7. And then for all the other regions, you would reach out to me. There will be an evaluation that pops up as you close out. So we would be really interested in seeing your feedback for this training, since again, it is a little bit different from other webinars we've done recently. And yeah, just thank you again for attending and for your participation. And we look forward to working with all of you as we get started in this process. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Bye-bye.